introduce temporary ordinance A81. Public hearings are a way to openly and transparently receive facts and opinions about the ordinance, both pro and con. It will be asked 3 times each who would like to speak in favor of or against the ordinance. After each question is asked 3 times, the public hearing will be adjourned with the ordinance then being in discussion in committee immediately following the public hearing. So right now I'll read it. Temporary ordinance A81 presented by the administration upon recommendation of the Planning Commission. An ordinance approving a zoning map amendment for parcel 02-00234 24047 7th Street from R4 urban density residential to MU4 suburban corridor as more fully described and depicted herein, and declaring an emergency. Is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this ordinance? Let me look. Mr. Paul, are you going to be discussing this?
I will be, yes.
Okay. Floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Paul. I'm the senior planner for the city. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and that way we can just review the summary report that I distributed to you all via email earlier today. So, as mentioned, the application summary that you see here before you is the same as that which was just read by Mr. James. The request is to accommodate new growth space for redevelopment of the existing Dairy Queen facility that's at the corner of 7th Street and Portage Trail. We have the applicant is Carl Werther. The representative is Dave Pellegrin Architects from Broad Boulevard here in Cuyahoga Falls. And what I've provided here is a planning commission review and recommendation. This item, as required, went to the city's planning commission. That was moved from the normal standing meeting date of a Tuesday on November 3rd, because it was election day, moved to Wednesday, the November 4th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting, at which time the commission members voted to, recommend approval of the zoning map amendment subject to the following findings and conditions. The City of Cuyahoga Falls Planning Commission found at that time that the proposed map amendment at 24047 Street from R4 urban density residential to MU4 mixed use center corridor met key criteria of section 1113.07D map amendment review criteria. And that just takes the specific criteria for which the Planning Commission needs to hold that review standard to right out of our code. It met all of those with the exception of criteria 5, which is related to the design regulations for the proposed district, that being the MU4 mixed use district. They did recommend with stipulations that conceptual plans displaying general compliance with the limited use standards for a drive-through establishment be submitted to the planning division for review prior to placement here before you, this body. And that happened. We've had good correspondence and plan review at different intervals with the applicant throughout the course of consideration of this development. You'll find in a moment here as I continue through this summary that they also had to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And in effect, what that did was it got it zoning compliant before getting to you through several iterations of site plan review and considering all the different criteria that would be required to meet the limited use standards. They found that the best layout, one that helps them able to move the project forward and is suited to the existing ingress and egress on 7th Street and Portage Trail and the pattern for redevelopment that they need to utilize on their properties at that corner location, resulted in the need for a variance from the code on the north property line. I'm going to jump over real quick just to show you an aerial view of what we're talking about and what those zoning designations are. And the parcel that's highlighted before you, the one in question with the same street address, is owned by Dairy Queen. You can see the one south of it, which includes the garage for the single family use at this location, is already zoned MU4. So they're requesting this one at 2404 7th Street also be zoned MU4 to accommodate new plans for the drive-through and new restaurant that they intend to build there. So moving along here, they went to the Board of Zoning Appeals on December the 9th, and the board approved their setback variance. The variance was for a distance of 22 feet from that north property line for new drive-through facilities. Being a limited use, there's some additional criteria and a slightly stricter standard that a drive-through restaurant would be required to meet when abutting a residential use. And that code states that all of those elements of the drive-through facility need to be at least 50 feet from a property line. The way the layout worked, and I'll show you, there was a portion of it provided in this summary, is that part of the drive-through facility and a speaker board for which they would do some ordering was going to be 22 feet from the property line. The Board of Zoning Appeals found that the variance request, based on review of multiple site plan layouts and constraints specific to characteristics of the site and business operations associated there, was viable for serving the interests of justice, that the proposed drive-through would not alter the essential character of the locality, which is another key criteria of the variance review because it exists there now, and that the proposed addition would require installation of new heavy landscape buffer to meet the city's code requirements. And they're showing that. So on this proposed site zoning map here, again, I'm just showing you a different view of what the zoning is and where specifically we're talking about the request to amend our zoning map. That area is starred. This just gives you an aerial image overview, and all those parcels there are part of what would become this new drive-through restaurant facility. And then this is a look at the proposed site plan, and you can see the variation and difference with the heavy landscape screening, and then they have a fence along the property line here to help buffer that, and that meets the heavy landscape code requirements. And further in the summary is just an elevation view that was provided to help you get an idea of what you might see there. So that concludes the summary report. I'll be glad to help answer any questions or provide clarification if you need it.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Very concise, very thorough. I will ask now if there's anybody that would like to speak against this ordinance. Let me take a look. Raise your hand if you are. And if you are against it and you wish to speak, to please, for our clerk of council, give your full name and address. But I do not see anybody. Let me go again. Is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this ordinance?
Yes, hello, James. This is Dave Pellegra.
Sure.
I'm the architect. I think Adam, Paul, and Fred have been a great asset to help us move the job forward. I don't really need to add anything, but I'll just tell the group I'm here. If there's a question, I'll be glad to address it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pellegra. And again, could you give your full name and your address, please?
Sure. David Pellegra, 2231 Broad Boulevard, Cuyahoga Falls.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will ask for the second time if there's anybody that would like to speak against this ordinance. And finally, one last time, is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this ordinance? And one last time, is there anybody that would like to speak against this ordinance? Okay, hearing none, this public hearing is now adjourned, and it is 6:39, and the Planning and Zoning Committee will come to order. Tonight, we have one ordinance to discuss, and that is, no surprise, temporary ordinance A81, presented by the administration upon recommendation of the Planning Commission. An ordinance approving a zoning map amendment for parcels 02-00234 2404 7th Street from R4 Urban Density Residential to MU4 Suburban Corridor as more fully described and depicted herein, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Paul, do you have anything to add to this?
Nothing additional, again, unless there are any questions or things that you might need clarification on from the summary and the two meetings that have been held on this project to date.
Right. No, the summary was very concise. The Planning Commission was pretty much in favor of this, you know, with the conditions, and the owner have agreed with these conditions, and I really don't have anything else to add to this. Is there any questions or concerns from the members of the committee?
Yes, Jerry.
Yes, Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. James. I realize this is just for an amendment of the parcel, and I'm in favor of that. But I just want to say how awesome it is that we're going to get a new Dairy Queen there. That's quite a hopping little corner there between El Mason, and it's been renovated, and new patio there. And if you've been inside Drug Mart anytime lately, they're renovating inside. So to have that nice new Dairy Queen there will be really lovely. I do have a couple questions about, since we're just talking about the zoning, but maybe Mr. Pellegra could answer it. So it looks like it's a 2-story building. What would be the use in the upstairs? Is that for seating?
No, it is not a 2-story building. It's just, it is somewhat of a prototype building. It is a little bit taller than a normal 1-story, but I still think it's under 16 feet high, I believe.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I think the landscaping looks awesome. I think now people are still going to be able to see the marching band mural as they drive through the parking lot, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's great because that is so crammed in there. I think safety wise, it's a much better setup the way it will be. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols Rhodes. Anybody else from the committee would like to make any statements or concerns? How about from the rail? Is there anybody that would like to make a statement? Mr. Balthus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the comments from Councilwoman Mary Nichols Rhodes. I probably have been through that drive-through more times than I should admit, but it would be helpful if someone could kind of remind me of the current screening that is there. I know that because we're changing the house behind it and they're going to put up new screening. Could you give a little bit more detail on the improvements to the screening that'll be done to kind of protect the residential areas that are nearby?
Good question. Mr. Paul, would you like to help him?
Sure, I can help do that. Why don't I go back to the shared screen here, and I'll pull up one of our files again that can help give you a little bit more detail. Again, this is the overview plan. And I'm sorry, I thought I had open the one I needed to. Let's see here. This again is the elevation. So I need to go back to the site plan. To answer your first question, there's a short fence there now.
Right.
And you can see in terms of proximity to the actual drive-through facilities themselves, this is a menu board, but the ordering board with speaker orientation is in the same way generally that it will be. It's actually closer to the lot line than what is being proposed because it's right on it. But this will be moved further up, of course, the street here to where, it's a little more central to this area where the new fence would be. It looks like that's actually new as separation, but what they're proposing, let me come back to this here, is a tiered fence because up at the front, they'd have to take it down to meet the height requirements. But it gets up to the maximum 6 feet in height as it goes further back. So bear with me just a second here. struggling to find our fence detail, which we had. If I come back over to I think I might be in the wrong file.
And it would be fine if you want to email it to me as well. I think that it'll be more than what is there now, which I think is very beneficial.
Yeah. I assume also that Mr. Pellegger probably has it readily available. Here we go. Okay, so you can see here what we require in the mixed use district for fencing, and a similar style one up across the street at Drug Mart, is a masonry pier on center, no more than every 16 feet of spacing. And so this is tiered at the front, again, at a maximum height of 4 feet, and then it goes up to the maximum of 6 feet where it's permissible by code. So that's intended to go all along. You can see the piers here supporting the fence, this portion of the property line, and then this gives you a higher level of detail in terms of what the proposed landscape screening would be like. And we'll review that against the length and number of species and types that have to go in per our code. We have that as a heavy screening requirement. And so it would have to be a 10-foot deep area with a mix of different trees and shrubs per every 10 feet for 100 feet. So that was the plan specifically that we were using when we took it to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and after they were given the requirement to put something in that was going to meet in terms of buffering.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'd also just, Mr. Chair, if I could just one more thing, I just agree with Councilwoman Mary Nichols Rhodes. I know we're just voting on the zoning issue here, but I do think it'll improve safety and traffic flow in that area. I know the Dairy Queen line often can find its way out to Portage Trail, which is completely understandable in my opinion. So I think it'll be a lot safer to have more space for cars lining on the site. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. Balthus. Are there any other comments? Oh, Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to comment to let all of council know that I did check with Mr. Paul. There were no residents, no public came to speak for or against at the planning or Board of Zoning Appeals. I know the people who live 2 doors over, and they certainly would have told me if they had a problem with it. And then across the street, it's Drug Mart's driveway. So it's not really a big change really for the people who live there. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Mr. Gorbach, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Jerry. I just wanted to express my support for the project. I spent a lot of pretty much every Friday night and after the high school football games at that Dairy Queen. So it'll be bittersweet to see a change, but it's definitely improvement. I want to say hi to Dave. I know we're in good hands with Dave Pellegger. He makes, any project he does, certainly in the falls, it's his hometown, and we're in good hands with him. So I'm comfortable with that and look forward to the improvement. Mary's right, that corner with the improvements happening and getting busier and busier, it'll really be nice to see. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. And speaking of that, we used to spend hours there after baseball victories from Little League and travel teams and youth hoops. And so we gave them a lot of business, and I'm pretty excited about how it's going to turn out. Ms. Penna, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I just had a quick question. When was the project slated to begin if this passes council? I did not see that. I was just curious.
Mr. Paul?
I'll defer to the applicant on that question.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Penta, they anticipate beginning this summer to do the project. So they're optimistic, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to move it forward now. We'd like to go into construction drawings within the next 2 months so we can get our building permits all lined up and be ready to proceed when the weather turns warm and sunny, as we all know it's going to happen again.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Is there any other questions or concerns from the rail or from the administration? And I did find out from Ms. Capriola that we did not get any kind of correspondence when it came to this ordinance. So if there isn't any other questions or concerns, I will ask for a motion and a second to bring this out of committee for a vote next week.
So moved. Sorry.
I guess I'll second it. There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion and the second, please signify by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
It was unanimous. I saw I saw Mr. Miller's.
He doesn't have any sound.
Can't hear you.
Yeah. Anyway, it passed unanimously. We'll bring out temporary ordinance A81 for a vote next week. And if there isn't any other business to come before the committee, we are adjourned.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.
You too.
Thanks.
Okay, it's 6:50 p.m. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. We have a three ordinances to discuss this evening. Before I begin, I'd like to approve the minutes from November 2nd, November 9th, and November 16th. Are there any corrections, comments, or changes to those minutes? Hearing none, they'll stand as submitted. Let's begin with temporary ordinance A97 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the city of Monroe Falls, Ohio, to extend the existing agreement for water services to Monroe Falls and declaring an emergency. Who would like to speak to this ordinance this evening? Somebody better speak to it, or I'm going to hold it and move on to temporary ordinance A98.
I'm coming. I was on mute. Sorry about that.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, this agreement is much like the one we have with Silver Lake. We signed a 10-year agreement with them. Silver Lakes was from 2008 to 2018, and this one was from 2011 to through 2020 here. So this is basically just to re-up the agreement for another 10 years. It's the rate is the same rate that Cuyahoga Falls pays plus 20%.
Okay, and for those that don't know that, I recognize the voice. That's you, Russ, right?
Yes.
Okay. So with this agreement this year, continuation, the rate is the same as the previous agreement.
That's correct. Cuyahoga Falls rate plus 20%.
Okay. Any changes outside of the rate structure, any nuances with the delivery of water, or any upgrades or anything that we needed to make or do need to make to fulfill this agreement?
No, I think it's pretty much the same agreement. Just for reference, in 2019, we provided them with about 120 million gallons of water at a cost of $321,000.
That's a big number, 120 million gallons. It sounds big. I imagine maybe it's not, but
yeah, for reference, we produce about 160 million gallons a month. So they're about 6 to 7% of our total consumption, or our total production, I mean.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Russ. Stay on the line here with us. I'm going to ask if there's any questions or comments. Are any questions or comments for Russ from the Finance Committee? From the rest of council, any questions or comments? Okay. May I have a motion to bring out temporary ordinance 897 for a vote next week?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Russ. We'll vote on temporary ordinance A97 next week. Let's move to temporary ordinance A98 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of the city's requirements for certain materials, supplies, and equipment for use by the Electric Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, I thought I saw your name up there. How you doing, Mike?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Yes, this is just the annual ordinance that we do to keep us from having to come back to council for some of the bigger items and some of the stuff we buy quite a bit of.
Sure.
So it's in line with everything we've done in previous years as far as budget amounts and the type of equipment.
Okay, very good. And just so those on the finance committee that haven't been on before council, a lot of these are annual requirement purchase requests that we're going to be discussing tonight. I don't have any questions unless the finance committee wants Mr. Doherty to go through each item and explain how he uses them throughout the year. Are there any questions or comments from the finance committee though? How about from council? Any questions? No? Okay. May I have a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A98 for a vote?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll bring out temporary ordinance A98. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Temporary ordinance A99 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of annual requirements of certain materials and supplies for use by the street department during 2021 and declaring an emergency. Is that you, Chuck?
Yes, it is, Mr. Gorbach. And
We're going to replace electric with street, and we have your ordinance, right?
that's right. Yeah, similar to last year, we're not making really any changes to what we do this next coming year. Still all the same great services that the street department provides.
Mhm.
What we have here is salt and asphalt are our two large dollar amount categories that bring this ordinance up. So the salt prices are staying the same as they did last winter. $71.89 per ton for salt. And then the asphalt we bid out every year, so we won't know what those prices are until spring.
Gotcha. And pretty much the same mixture of expenditures from each line item as in years past?
Well, as far as last year versus this year, we are about $190,000 less than what we budgeted in 2020. So we have $740,650.
Mhm.
Last year we actually budgeted over $951,000.
Right.
The big reduction there is salt.
Right. We talked about that in budget.
Yeah, we had a very mild winter last year.
Right.
We only around 5,000 tons for the season, and we normally would use around 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So big savings. So we ended up with full barns at the end of the season to start with. With what we intend to use and with what we're starting with now, it's going to be less. We need less salt than last year. So that's the big difference.
Right. Okay. Good. Thanks. Are there any questions or comments from the Finance Committee? From the rail? May I have a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A99 for a vote?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Hey, Chuck, I want to give you a shout out for the sanitation drive-by for the birthday party for that little fella. I loved reading. I didn't hear about that prior to reading it in the paper, so I just thought that was great.
Yeah, thank you. That turned out to be an excellent little story. And to
Yeah.
begin, we just thought it would kind of fly under the radar and no one would really know about it. And, it turned out to be a really awesome story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad. Good, great job to you guys. I don't know how it all came together other than what was written in the paper, but I thought it was cool.
Thank you.
Temporary ordinance A100 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of annual requirements of certain materials and supplies for use by the Sanitation Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Okay, so on the sanitation side of things here, we have our big dollar amount category here is with various size refuse containers.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we're going to buy yard waste carts, trash carts, recycle carts, a couple of miscellaneous things, public litter containers, and that sort of thing. And it's compared to last year, we're about half. We kind of cut our budget in half this year to just try to keep our overall department costs down this year.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Pretty simple. Any questions or comments from the Finance Committee? From the rail? But he's quiet tonight. May I have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A100 for a vote next week?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Let's move to temporary ordinance A101 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of the city's requirements of certain services, materials, and supplies for use by the Water and Sewer Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Yeah, similar situation here. About a third of this cost goes to our water treatment chemicals. The others, just miscellaneous things that we use pretty much consistently throughout the year.
Okay. Similar to last year. Any questions or comments for Mr. Kring regarding temporary ordinance A101 from the Finance Committee? From the rail? I haven't asked from the public. I keep forgetting to do that. Are there any members of anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this ordinance or any prior ordinances we discussed thus far? Okay, is there a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A101 for a vote next week?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We move to temporary ordinance A102 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety or the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase or lease of various vehicles and related equipment for use by the city and declaring an emergency. I don't even know what I read. I kept, do we have the doggy under control? Who would like to speak to temporary ordinance A102?
I believe that's John Campbell, John, you're on mute.
Oh, I didn't see him trying to talk.
There we go.
Hey, John.
Hello, everybody. Mr. Chairman, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks. Good evening.
For annual requirements for the garage, I believe that's what the 102 is, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
No, you're on vehicles.
We're on vehicles for 102?
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty much, that's a pretty straightforward deal. Met with most of the departments at least once or twice throughout the the budget season, if you will, and got what they wanted, and hopefully we'll buy some reasonably useful vehicles for each department's needs in that regard. Tried to mix up a few hybrids where they were available, to kind of move towards some alternative fuel selections where they made sense.
Right.
Mostly that's going to be like police department patrol vehicles, and the 2 water department SUVs will all be hybrids.
Right.
And I think they'll be well received.
Yes. I know Ms. Nichols Rhodes is appreciative of those EV vehicles. Not to mention the electric pickup truck.
Oh yeah. I hope that makes a very unique addition to our fleet, and we'll certainly get it out to events other than just for garage use as we're able to do that in this coming year.
Absolutely. I look forward to the unveiling. Are there any questions for Mr. Campbell regarding any of the items that's on the list for this ordinance? Finance Committee or the rail? No questions? Okay. May I have a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A102?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Here comes your garage, John.
Okay.
Temporary ordinance A103 presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of annual requirements of certain materials, supplies, and services for use by the Garage Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
For this particular one, I think that at least as far as tires go, we benefit from a fairly long state term schedule contract with both Goodyear and Firestone, and I think it extends. This may be going into the 3rd year of it. But that kept those prices very stable over the entire period. And, we have, of course, fuel prices that do vary depending upon, certain factors, not just locally, but, more nationally. So, but I think overall the numbers fairly well mirror exactly what we had, as far as expenses in 2020. And anticipating that stays relatively stable going through the next year.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope we have some stability next year, huh?
Once our staffing gets back to where it's supposed to be, we've had some very unusual situations in the garage this past year, and if you got to have them all at once and get them over with.
Whether you chose to or not, right?
Indeed, I would have certainly made other choices if I could.
Well, I wish you luck on steadying the ship this year.
Thank you.
Are there any questions and comments from the Finance Committee or from the rail? Hearing none, is there a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A103?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, and we'll vote on temporary ordinance A103 next week. Temporary ordinance A104 presented by the administration. An ordinance levying special assessments for the repair or replacement of sidewalks and drive approaches in the sidewalk and drive approach repair and replacement district for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Damasi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our annual ordinance, which allows us to send out the invoices for the sidewalk and drive approaches that we repaired in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
The cost for the sidewalk replacement will be $15 per foot and $7 per square foot for driveways. In 2020, we replaced 159 locations of sidewalk and 32 locations of drive approaches. And we've sent our list over to Finance Department, and with passage of this ordinance, they'll be sending out invoices shortly.
Okay, good. How do you feel the program went?
These numbers are right in line with previous years, recent previous years. So I think the program is pretty popular. It remains so. And property owners, we feel, take advantage of our program to help them out.
Mm-hmm. Good to hear. Are there any questions for Mr. Damasi from the Finance Committee? From the rail?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
it's
Mr.
Frank Stams. I have a question for
Sure.
Mr. Damasi. Is there any particular part of the city that happens in more? I'm just trying to prepare myself for any concerns or my constituents may have. Is there any part of the city, when you said that you've did 100, I think 159 repairs, is there any part of the city that sees more repair than others?
The repairs are really scattered across the entire city. We do the repairs on request. It's not like we go out and look for them. We get the requests from, generally the older parts of the city, areas where we have tree lawns that have a large tree in it. That seems to do damage to the sidewalk. But honestly, we've done replacements in all 8 wards every year that we've been doing the program. Majority of it is probably, as in the older neighborhoods, but again, it's completely by request.
Thank you. Now you answered my second question was, how do you discover these sidewalks? And you're saying upon request. And then you mentioned it was $15 a square foot?
No, a linear foot, $15 a running foot.
Okay.
That's what the cost was for 2020. As we go into 2021, we'll see what those prices come in at. And again, we always invoice after the fact. So, next year, based on bids, it could remain at 15. It could be a little higher, it could be lower, but that's where we're at for this year.
And the property owner gets invoiced, right?
Right, right. And so not the resident necessarily, because that could be a tenant. It's always the property owner that gets the invoice.
Thank you.
All set, Frank?
All set, thank you.
Okay, sure. Yep. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Damasi? Hearing none, may I have a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A104?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Temporary ordinance A105, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for disposal of municipal solid waste and declaring an emergency.
Yes, Mr. Gorbach, our contract for solid waste ends at the end of the year here. So there is a provision there to extend the contract for 2 more years under a mutual agreement. And as we were looking here at the end of the contract, we kind of saw what the other bids for other contracts were going out for, and we felt this was our best course of action. The contract is for a 3% increase in year 1 and year 2 of this contract.
Okay. These are rates. These amounts per ton, these aren't going to affect residents' rates.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
These are the rates, the tipping fees that we pay and fill the solid waste.
Right. Okay. Very good. Questions or comments from the Finance Committee? From the rail? From the public? Hearing none, is there a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A105 for a vote next week?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. We'll vote on temporary ordinance A105. Finally, temporary ordinance A106, presented by the administration. An ordinance providing for supplemental and/or amended appropriations of money for current operating expenses and capital expenditures of the city of Cuyahoga Falls, and authorizing the transfer of appropriations within and for the various funds hereinafter set forth, and declaring an emergency. Brian?
Thank you, Chairman Gorbach. On Friday, I sent out a few different files. I sent out Exhibit A and B to this ordinance, as well as a couple of ancillary files, detail files, and explaining what amended appropriations we need to make here at the end of this year. This ordinance is commonly referred to the cleanup ordinance, and so as we moved along the year, we needed to make a few changes to our appropriations as they stood in the 2020 budget. And on Exhibit A, total appropriations from our total that was adopted during the 2020 budget, we're decreasing appropriations by a little over $3 million in total. And the detail was provided, and I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding those line items or discuss them at any of those that you'd like to discuss.
Are there any you want to point out or talk about beyond what we talked about in budget, Brian?
Majority of them are just talked about at budget time. The major items that we had to appropriate and move around was the CARES Act dollars, a little over $5.5 million of CARES Act. We did appropriate a small portion of that when we created the CARES Act funds that we were required to create, but then we got additional funding from CARES Act in which we needed to appropriate those dollars. We then decreased appropriations accordingly in police, fire, and in our communications departments. The rest of it would be we are decreasing some appropriations as a result of income tax collections. As we talked about throughout the year, income tax collections being down a small amount there. I think we are still holding our own on income taxes coming into the city, so I've actually been pleasantly surprised on where we're at there. Otherwise, there aren't as many moves, just little items here and there, what I would consider little items here and there. We did decrease capital projects by $2 million. Most of that is because of deferred projects or projects that are still moving along but need to be moved into 2021, and those were included in our budget. The other items that would be of larger amounts would be the self-insurance fund that we decreased due to claims of $700,000. So generally speaking, we did some decreases in appropriations for 2020.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Hoffman from the Finance Committee? From the rail? Any member of the public have any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A106?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll vote on temporary ordinance A106. Is there anything else to come before the Finance Committee? Okay, that concludes our meeting. Thank you.
Okay, it is 7:18 and we will open the Public and Industrial Improvements Committee. We have two items to discuss this evening. Temporary ordinance A107 and temporary resolution A108. Temporary ordinance A107, an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the replacement or adjustment of concrete sidewalks, drive approaches, and curbs at various locations in the city of Cuyahoga Falls and declaring an emergency. And Mr. Demasi, if you would please talk about this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is our annual ordinance that allows us to enter into the contract for repair and replacement of the sidewalks and curbs and the ramps for the year 2021. Bids for this year's project will be opened mid-March. And typically each year work begins when school lets out, which is typically mid-June. And again, we encourage requests to be called into the engineering department, and we'll go out and take a look at the sidewalks and make sure that they meet our criteria for replacements.
All right, thank you, Mr. Demasi. Are there any members of the committee who have any questions or comments for Mr. Demasi?
Madam Chair, could I say one thing?
Of course, Mr. Mayor, yes.
I assume that most cities have something similar to this to allow them to come in and redo the sidewalks. Do you have a list of all the cities that pay half?
Do I?
Do you know of any cities that pay half?
So Akron has a program, but I think they pay full. I'm not sure that there's a program out there that the city actually pays half of the program for the residents.
So it's normally the homeowner's responsibility and we cover half.
Yeah, and so you know, as a starting point, property owners are always responsible for their sidewalks, and my office issues permits all the time to property owners to replace their sidewalks. But what we offer is a program that allows us to do it for them, and we share in the cost. You know, if a property owner has a good relationship with the contractor, for example, and maybe they can do it at a better price, or maybe they can be a contractor and do it. But by and far, I think this is a great program where we help support property owners to replace these.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, of course. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
Madam
Yes.
Chair, I guess I could ask Mr. Demasi, how does one apply for that program?
So we get requests from pedestrians, we get requests from council people, and we get requests from the property owners themselves. I would say most of our requests are from are from residents. And so, you know, residents walk the neighborhood and they see the sidewalks and they'll call my office and they'll ask us to evaluate. So what we do is we go out and evaluate, and at that point we start the conversation with the property owner, who may or may not have started the conversation about replacing their sidewalk and paying for it. And so that can be a tricky situation sometimes, but by and far, you know, when we have that discussion with property owners, they see the benefit of it. You know, we do the work in 1 year, they don't get the invoice for another 12 months later. And then at that point, they can either pay it in full or they can pay it over 2 payments on their property taxes. So, and they don't have to do a thing. They don't have to call the contractors. They don't have to schedule the work. All they have to do is just write a check the following year. So, but yeah, anybody can call it in and ask us to evaluate. And just because they call it in doesn't mean that we'll replace it. Because if it doesn't meet our criteria, you know, at least a 1/2 inch separation, it's a trip hazard. We have a whole litany of items. But if it meets those criteria, we'll add it to the program.
And how about the cost? Is the cost, the mayor was talking about a shared cost, and you were talking about a shared cost. Is the property owner responsible for the entire cost, or is there a program that allows them to share the cost with the city?
So the cost that we assess, which is in that ordinance that we approved, or it just came out of committee in Chairman Gorbach's committee, the $15, that represents half of the program. So when the property owner is billed the $15 for this year, and again, future years might be something different, that represents half of the program.
Oh, I see. So for people listening, that's the program, that the $15 is half the cost.
That was the charge for this year's 2020. Again, moving forward, it could be that or it could be higher.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right. I'd like to entertain a motion to bring out temporary ordinance A107 for a vote next week.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say yes.
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 Motion passes 3-0. Our other ordinance, or resolution rather, is temporary resolution A108, a resolution creating the year 2021, for the year 2021, a sidewalk and drive approach repair or replacement district containing such streets, alleys, or public roadways within the corporate limits of the city of Cuyahoga Falls, declaring the necessity of repairing or replacing the sidewalks and drive approaches abutting on such streets, alleys, or public roadways within said corporate limits, and providing the method for levying special assessments and declaring an emergency. So I'll just say that I checked with Ms. Ciatola because we have for the sidewalk and the street or the apron repairs, we have a resolution and an ordinance. So I asked why that is, and she explained that in the finance committee, so there are three purposes that all of our legislation point toward to make this happen. So the resolution 108 is to create the program or resume the program, continue. The 107 is the one that enables us to have contracts and put the work out to bid. And then 104 in finance is so that we may levy the assessments or send an invoice to the residents who use the program. Okay. Ms. Ciotola is nodding. Okay. So anyway, do you have anything else to say, Mr. Damasi, about this one?
No, you must have been reading my notes. That's everything that I had to say. So we're good to go.
All right. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Okay, from the rail. All right, then I'd like to or from the public. Sorry. All right, then I'd like to entertain a motion to bring temporary resolution A108 out of committee next week for a vote by the full council.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. And if there's no other hands or business, that concludes the Public and Industrial Improvements Committee for this evening.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. It is 7:26 and the Community Development Committee comes to order. We have one piece of legislation to consider. It is A109 presented by the administration, an ordinance authorizing the Director of Community Development to amend the Community Reinvestment Area Tax Exemption Agreement with Buckeye Sports Center, Inc. to reflect the title of the land transfer to Sun Sports Property, LLC, a subsidiary to Buckeye Sports Center, Inc., and declaring emergency. So the short of it, it's basically just a name change. Diana, is there any other information we need to discuss on this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, that's essentially it. It's a cleanup ordinance of sorts. This was a CRA that council had passed back in 2015 for 10 years, 50% for Buckeye Sports Center. And with their improvements to that facility, they erected a boat display warehouse, 7,500 extra square feet. Since then, in our audit, we discovered that they transferred ownership of this parcel to another company. And when we investigated that, we discovered that it was actually still theirs. They just created another company, that's not too uncommon, and owned that other company. So Ohio Development Services Agency requires that we amend this ordinance and the agreement and refile it in Columbus. So that's really all we're doing here. Everything else is the same from the original ordinance granting the tax abatement.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Or any questions or comments from council or the public? Okay, I don't see any. So at this time, I would like to entertain a motion approving A109 out of committee with a favorable recommendation.
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. Passes 3-0. We'll bring out A109 for Monday, the December 21st for a vote. And if there's nothing else, that concludes community development.
I think you meant December 28th.
Oh, thank you. December 28th. Thank you. Yes. For favorable vote, we'll vote for it on December 28th. And that's it.
Happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays, everybody. Be safe.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy
Merry
holidays.
Christmas all.
Nobody emailed me for my size of what I wear for gifts.
You can have some dogs.